It was just another Tuesday morning when my world began to unravel. The kind of day you'd forget if it hadn't turned into something so wrong. My name is Alex, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happens. Or at least that's what I used to think. The sun filtered through the blinds of my bedroom window, painting stripes across the hardwood floor. Outside, birds chirped their usual morning symphony, accompanied by the faint hum of lawnmowers from down the street. It was comforting, predictable even. I shuffled into the kitchen, barefoot, still half asleep, and poured myself a cup of coffee. The smell of dark roast filled the air, sharp and grounding. My wife, Claire, sat at the table scrolling through her phone, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She glanced up and smiled. A small gesture, but enough to remind me how lucky I was. Our daughter, Lily, ran around the living room chasing our golden retriever, Max. Her laughter echoed off the walls, light and carefree. Everything felt normal, perfectly ordinary. That's why, looking back now, I can't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by someone nearby, but by something far worse. Something waiting for the right moment to step into our lives. I left for work shortly after breakfast. The drive to the office was uneventful, as always. The radio played soft rock hits from the 80s, and the roads were clear except for the occasional school bus lumbering along. As I pulled into the parking lot of the marketing firm where I've worked for 6 years, I noticed a flyer taped to the windshield of my car. At first glance, it looked like any other community notice. Garishly colored paper advertising a local garage sale or lost pet. But this one was different. The flyer depicted a crudely drawn figure with an exaggerated grin stretching impossibly wide across its face. Beneath it, bold red letters screamed, "Beware of the smiling stranger." There was no contact information, no explanation, just those chilling words. A shiver ran down my spine as I peeled the paper off the glass. The edges crinkled under my fingers, and I couldn't help but feel like the drawing was staring back at me, mocking me somehow. I tossed the flyer onto the passenger seat, trying to dismiss it as some prankster's idea of fun. Still, the image lingered in my mind all morning. During meetings, I found myself zoning out, picturing that grotesque smile. By lunchtime, I decided to throw the flyer away, hoping to rid myself of the unease it brought. But when I opened the trash bin near my desk, there it was again, the same flyer, sitting on top of the pile of discarded papers. Only this time, the message had changed. Instead of "Beware," the text now read, "He knows where you live." My breath caught in my throat. How could it have gotten here? I hadn't left my desk since tossing it earlier. Panic bubbled inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe someone in the office was messing with me. Or maybe... No, I couldn't entertain that thought. Whatever was happening, it wasn't real. Couldn't be real. When I got home that evening, the house seemed quieter than usual. Claire greeted me with a kiss, but she didn't ask about my day. Something about her demeanor felt off. And then I saw it, the flyer pinned to our front door, flapping gently in the breeze. This time, the smiling face wasn't crude or childish. It was detailed, lifelike. Too lifelike. Its eyes followed me as I approached, and for a split second, I swore they blinked. "What is this?" I muttered aloud, tearing the flyer down. Claire stepped outside, frowning. "What's wrong?" Before I could answer, Lily called from inside the house. Her voice trembled. "Daddy? There's someone in my room." And that's when I realized whatever this thing was, it wasn't done with us yet. I froze, the flyer still clutched in my hand like a cursed artifact. Lily's voice echoed from inside the house, soft, trembling, and far too young to carry such fear. "Daddy? There's someone in my room." My heart pounded as I turned toward the doorway, Claire already moving ahead of me with hurried steps. "Stay here," I said instinctively, though my legs betrayed me by carrying me forward anyway. The hallway felt longer than usual, shadows pooling unnaturally in the corners despite the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. Each step creaked beneath my weight, amplifying the tension coiling tight in my chest. When we reached Lily's room, the door was slightly ajar. Claire pushed it open slowly, her breath hitching as she scanned the space. Toys were scattered across the floor, the curtains fluttered gently against the breeze from the open window, and the bed was neatly made, exactly as it had been this morning. Nothing seemed out of place, yet something felt wrong. "There's no one here," Claire whispered, her voice tinged with relief but also confusion. She looked at Lily, who stood clutching her stuffed rabbit, wide-eyed and pale. "Sweetheart, are you sure you saw someone?" Lily nodded vigorously, tears welling up in her eyes. "He was smiling at me," she stammered, a big, scary smile. He told me not to tell." My stomach dropped. "Told you what?" I asked, kneeling down to meet her gaze. But before she could answer, a low, guttural laugh reverberated through the room. Not loud enough to startle us physically, but enough to send a chill crawling up my spine. It came from nowhere and everywhere all at once, fading into silence just as quickly as it began. Claire grabbed Lily protectively, pulling her close. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave. "I don't know," I admitted, standing up and scanning the room again. My eyes landed on the window. It hadn't been open when we left for work this morning. I was certain of it. Now it gaped wide, inviting the cool autumn air inside. Outside, the backyard stretched empty and still, bathed in golden light. Nothing moved except the occasional rustle of leaves. But then I saw it. On the glass pane of the window, etched faintly as if by frost, was another message. "You can't keep her safe." The letters glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat before vanishing entirely. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a stack of books on Lily's desk. Claire noticed my reaction and followed my gaze to the now blank window. Her face drained of color. "What did you see?" she whispered. Before I could respond, Lily let out a whimper. We both turned to look at her, only to find her staring past us. Her eyes locked onto something behind me. Slowly, dread pooling in my veins, I turned around. Standing in the doorway was a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen, or hoped never to see again. His silhouette was human enough, dressed in a tattered suit that hung loosely on his frame. But his face, oh God, his face, that same grotesque grin from the flyers stretched impossibly wide across his features, splitting his cheeks almost to his ears. His teeth gleamed unnaturally white, each one jagged and sharp like shards of broken glass. And his eyes, they weren't eyes at all, but hollow voids, black pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. For a moment, time stopped. None of us moved. None of us breathed. Then, with deliberate slowness, the figure raised a skeletal finger and pointed directly at Lily. "She's mine now," he rasped, his voice scraping against my eardrums like nails on chalkboard. Before I could react, he vanished. Not stepping away or retreating, but simply ceasing to exist, leaving behind only the faint scent of burnt sugar and the lingering echo of his laughter. Claire screamed, clutching Lily tighter. I rushed to them, wrapping my arms around both of them as if my mere presence could shield them from whatever nightmare had invaded our home. "We need to leave," I said urgently, grabbing my phone from my pocket. "Now!" As I dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers, I realized the call wasn't going through. No signal. Of course, there was no signal. Whatever this thing was, it didn't want help coming. "What do we do?" Claire pleaded, her voice breaking. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the flyer's warnings had come true. He knew where we lived, and now he was watching us. The house felt like a tomb now, every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind magnified tenfold. We huddled together in the living room, the three of us clinging to each other as if proximity alone could ward off the encroaching darkness. Claire's face was pale, her hands trembling as she held Lily close. My daughter buried her face in her mother's chest, sobbing quietly, while I paced back and forth trying and failing to come up with a plan. What do we do? Claire asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes darted toward the windows, as though expecting the smiling stranger to reappear at any moment. I don't know, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. But we can't stay here. He knows where we are. If we leave, and go where? Claire interrupted, her voice rising. He'll just follow us. You saw what happened when you tried to call for help. There's no signal, Alex. It's like he's blocking us. She wasn't wrong. Every attempt to use our phones had failed. Even turning on the TV or radio yielded nothing but static. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just haunting us. It was isolating us, cutting us off from the outside world. The realization made my stomach churn. This wasn't random. It was calculated, personal. As if on cue, the lights flickered once, then twice, before plunging us into darkness. A collective gasp escaped from Claire and Lily, and I fumbled for the flashlight I'd grabbed earlier. Its beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the frightened faces of my family. Stay close, I said firmly, though my own voice betrayed a tremor. We moved cautiously toward the kitchen, where I hoped to find candles and matches. But as we crossed the threshold, something caught my eye. A shadow moving across the wall, too fast to be natural. I swung the flashlight around, heart hammering, only to find nothing there. Just empty space. Yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, pressing down on me like a physical weight. Did you see that? Claire whispered, clutching Lily tighter. No, I lied. The truth was, I didn't want to admit how terrified I was. Admitting it would make it real. And right now, denial was the only thing keeping me upright. We lit a few candles and set them on the counter, their flickering glow casting eerie patterns on the walls. For a brief moment, the warmth of the light seemed to push back the suffocating dread. But then Lily let out a sharp cry, pointing toward the window above the sink. There, etched into the glass in jagged letters, was another message. She's already chosen. Claire screamed, backing away until she hit the refrigerator. I rushed to the window, peering outside, but the yard remained eerily still. No sign of movement, no figure lurking in the shadows. Just the message glaring back at us like a challenge. What does it mean? Claire demanded, tears streaming down her face. What does it mean, Alex? I shook my head, unable to answer. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of what little we knew. The flyers, the messages, the smiling stranger's appearance. It all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. This wasn't about us. It was about Lily. Somehow she was connected to him, chosen, marked. Before I could dwell on it further, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crept along the edges of the windows, spreading rapidly until the entire pane was coated in ice. In the center of it, a face began to form, not drawn or written, but appearing as though carved directly into the frost. The same grotesque grin stared back at us, wider than ever, its hollow eyes boring into mine. Lily whimpered, burying her face in Claire's shoulder. "Make it stop," she pleaded, her voice muffled. "Please, Daddy, make it stop. I wanted to. God, I wanted to, but I didn't know how. All I could do was grab the nearest object, a heavy cast iron skillet, and smash it against the window. The glass shattered, sending shards raining onto the floor, but the frost remained intact, clinging stubbornly to the frame. The face didn't disappear. Instead, it seemed to grow more defined, more menacing. "He's coming," I muttered under my breath, gripping the skillet tightly. "We need to get out of here." "But where?" Claire cried, panic overtaking her. "You said it yourself, he'll follow us." "She's right," a voice rasped behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping the skillet. Standing in the doorway was the smiling stranger, his presence filling the room like a suffocating fog. His grin widened impossibly further, splitting his cheeks until I thought they might tear. "You can run, but you cannot hide. She belongs to me. Stay away from her," I shouted, brandishing the skillet like a weapon. But he didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head, studying me with those abyssal eyes. "You misunderstand," he said, his tone almost playful. "This isn't about you. It never was. She chose me long before you were born." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound brave. Instead of answering, he raised a skeletal hand and snapped his fingers. The room erupted into chaos. The candles extinguished themselves, plunging us into darkness once again. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed, a sound so innocent yet utterly wrong given the circumstances. Then came the whispers, dozens of them, overlapping and indistinct, but all carrying the same message. "She's mine," Claire screamed, pulling Lily toward the door. I followed, adrenaline surging through my veins. We burst into the hallway, only to find it transformed. The walls stretched endlessly in both directions, warped and distorted like something out of a nightmare. Doors lined either side, each one slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of impossible scenes within. A forest of twisted trees, a flooded basement, a barren wasteland beneath a blood-red sky. "This way," I yelled, grabbing Claire's hand and dragging her toward the front door. But when we reached it, it refused to budge, no matter how hard I pulled. It was as if the house itself had turned against us, trapping us inside. Behind us, the smiling stranger's laughter grew louder, closer. I turned to face him, desperation fueling my resolve. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me first." His grin faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by something darker. Anger, perhaps, or amusement. "Very well," he said, stepping forward. As he did, the air around him shimmered, distorting reality itself. Shadows writhed at his feet, coalescing into shapes that resembled claws, reaching for us. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he stopped. His head tilted again, as though listening to something only he could hear. "Not yet," he murmured almost to himself. With a snap of his fingers, the hallway returned to normal, the walls solid, the doors closed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, leaving behind an eerie silence. What just happened?" Claire stammered, clutching Lily tightly. "He's gone," I said, though the words felt hollow. I knew better than to believe it. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence that followed the smiling stranger's departure was deafening, a fragile calm before the storm. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing, but every instinct screamed at me to move, to act. "We can't stay here," I said urgently, grabbing Claire and Lily by their arms. "If we don't leave now, he'll come back." "But where do we go?" Claire pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "I don't care. Anywhere but here," I snapped, pulling them toward the front door again. This time, it opened with an ominous creak, revealing the darkened street beyond. The air outside felt unnaturally cold, biting at our skin like needles. Still, we ran, stumbling into the night without a plan, only the primal urge to escape. We hadn't gone more than a block when the world around us began to warp once more. Streetlights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that danced unnaturally across the pavement. Behind us, faint footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. I turned sharply, clutching the cast-iron skillet tighter, ready to fight if I had to. But there was nothing there, just empty streets bathed in sickly yellow light. Then came the laughter, Lily's laughter, high-pitched and innocent, yet utterly wrong coming from behind us. I whipped around to see her standing several feet away, staring up at something invisible. Her expression was blank, almost serene, as though she were lost in a dream. "Lily!" Claire screamed, rushing toward her. But before she could reach her, the ground beneath Lily cracked open, swallowing her whole. A gaping chasm yawned wide, revealing a swirling void filled with glowing red eyes and distorted faces, all screaming silently, all reaching out for her. "No!" I roared, diving forward and grabbing Lily's hand just as she slipped further into the abyss. Claire joined me, tears streaming down her face as we pulled with everything we had. Above us, the smiling stranger loomed, his grotesque grin wider than ever, his hollow eyes gleaming with triumph. "You cannot win," he rasped, leaning closer. "She is mine, always has been. Let her go," I shouted, my voice raw with fury and fear. "Take me instead." For a moment, he hesitated, tilting his head as though considering my offer. Then, with a chilling laugh, he shook his head. "Oh no, dear father, you misunderstand. She doesn't need saving. She wants this." Before I could process his words, Lily looked up at me, her eyes no longer her own. They were black pits, identical to his. And then she smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that mirrored the monster above us. Time seemed to freeze as Lily's smile widened, impossibly stretching across her face until it mirrored the smiling stranger's grotesque grin. Her once familiar eyes, now endless voids of darkness, stared back at me, devoid of any trace of my daughter. The hand I clutched slipped from my grasp like smoke, and she tumbled backward into the abyss below. Claire screamed, lunging after her, but I caught her just in time, pulling her away from the edge before she too was consumed. The chasm began to close, its jagged edges knitting together with an unnatural speed. Within moments, the street returned to normal, the cracked pavement smooth, the flickering lights steady. It was as if nothing had happened. But we knew better. What just happened?" Claire sobbed, collapsing against me. Her body trembled violently, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Where's Lily? Where is she?" I didn't answer. How could I? The truth was too horrifying to put into words. Instead, I held her tightly, staring at the spot where our daughter had vanished, my mind racing. Had she been taken by the smiling stranger? Or had she willingly gone with him, as his cryptic words suggested? Before I could process anything further, a soft laugh echoed behind us. We turned sharply to see the smiling stranger standing there, his presence suffocating. His grin was wider than ever, splitting his face almost to the point of breaking. He tilted his head, studying us with those hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through our souls. "She chose," he rasped, his voice dripping with mockery. "And you cannot undo what has been done." "Chose what?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage and desperation. "What did she choose?" He didn't respond directly. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his tattered suit and pulled out something small, a a single photograph. With a flourish, he tossed it at our feet. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling as I turned it over. It was a picture of Lily, smiling brightly, surrounded by other children, all of them wearing the same wide, unnatural grins. Behind them stood the smiling stranger, his arms outstretched as though welcoming them into some twisted family. In the background, faint shapes moved in the shadows, figures that looked eerily familiar. One of them bore a striking resemblance to my late grandmother, who had passed away years ago. Another looked like a childhood friend who'd disappeared without explanation when I was young. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "A glimpse of her future," the smiling stranger replied, his tone almost gleeful. "She will thrive among us, and one day, when the time is right, she will return for you." With that, he vanished, leaving only the faint scent of burnt sugar lingering in the air. Claire collapsed to her knees, clutching the photograph as sobs racked her body. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But how could I lie to her when I didn't even believe it myself? We stumbled home in silence, each step heavier than the last. When we finally reached the house, I locked every door and window, though deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Whatever force had taken Lily wasn't bound by physical barriers. It was everywhere and nowhere. That night, as Claire cried herself to sleep on the couch, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the photograph. Something about it gnawed at me, a detail I couldn't quite place. Then it hit me. In the background of the photo, partially obscured by shadow, was another figure. A man who looked exactly like me, but older, wearier, with the same hollow eyes as the smiling stranger. Was this my fate? To become one of them? To lose myself completely to whatever darkness had claimed Lily? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun.